Hello, and welcome to Seeking Heaven, the Near-Death Experience and Other Phenomena. I am your host, Tamara Caulder Richardson. I am a multiple near-death experiencer and spiritually transformative experiencer, as well as an international medium and channeler. So if you haven't subscribed, subscribe, like, watch, make comments. I definitely try to respond to all of them. So I'm so excited about today. This is something that's been long planning, and wow, it's finally here. I have a very good friend, client, and he's a brilliant, he's a brilliant man. He is a scientific researcher as well as a philosopher, and he's here today, my friend, which is the author of Master of Reality, and he's going to be talking about super relativity and the unified field theory. And it's amazing because he's been studying and researching, and his whole life, his work has been on Einstein and completing anti-gravity, and he has solved a lot of this. So today he is going to present an awesome PowerPoint presentation, and then stay tuned for part two, because we're going to go into the question about alien spacecraft technology, all sorts of things about stargates. He is really interesting. So stay tuned for that. And then we'll have a third episode, which will be the spirituality behind it and how we met and his journey with the science and how that crosses over. So really fascinating. You're not going to find it anywhere but here. Brilliance and a lot of fun. So here we go. Let me introduce Mark Fiorentino. You're here.
Hello, Tamara.
Well, you finally made it.
Yes, I'm very happy to be here. It's going to be a lot of fun today.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, I can't really do you justice in the intro. I mean, knowing you as a person, you have so much integrity and you're such a kind person. But when you look at your actual scientific research findings and your passion, which is solving the unified field theory, it's amazing. I mean, it really is. You really get to see how your mind works. So if you want to dive right into the PowerPoint, I know there's a lot of meat there. I know everybody's probably anxious to see what you have.
Sure. I just want to introduce the PowerPoint by giving you a slight or a quick overview of the super relativity, which is a metaphysical theory. I have studied the fundamental nature of reality. In other words, I studied the nature of things that exist. Super relativity is a reality model and a philosophy that deals with the first principles of this material world. This includes abstract concepts such as being, knowing, substance, cause, identity, time, and space. The theory over the years has evolved into the unified field theory as Einstein first envisioned it. It is more commonly known as the theory of everything. The theory is comprised of a series of metaphysical concepts and axioms that demonstrate that this physical reality exists independently of an individual's consciousness and mind. I believe in realism. At the same time, I believe that our universe is a subset of a superverse in which consciousness, our physical universe, and all other universes and dimensions are connected to each other and to God, who is the source and the creator of all things physical and non-physical. The theory of super relativity is an intelligent design theory. With that in mind, that should frame what this proposal, this PowerPoint is all about.
Sure.
So let's just get into that now, and we'll share the screen.
Okay.
All right, so it's the origin of mass, gravity, inertia. That's what this is all about. That is the road to the unified field theory. Einstein never really realized the mechanical explanation, but he got very close. And in this proposal, in the PowerPoint here, I'm going to go into the details that really reveals that he was on the edge of getting it all. He just was born too soon to get the full mechanical model. That will be revealed today in this PowerPoint presentation.
Did you want to explain anything as it goes, Mark?
Pardon?
Would you like to explain anything as it goes, or just let it be self?
Uh, yeah, there might be a few things that I
Okay.
could say. The ether is very important to the theory of super relativity. There are hidden patterns that I discovered both in history and in the physical realm that led to the discovery. This is the key. The origins of mass, inertia, and gravity, they all come from the same place, the same mechanical model. The most incredible discovery is the slip wave, the cause of particle motion, vital to the universe. The spin-off of discovering gravity was the anti-gravity. This is also revealed. Breaking the light speed barrier. It's necessary to go to other worlds.
I didn't know what to expect when we started this interview, but I got to tell you, Mark, you're one of the best guests I've ever had the pleasure of having on.
Oh, thank you.
Provided me with some incredible, and my viewers, some incredible information here.
Okay, so that gives you a good idea of what we're going to go over today. As I said before, it's the theory of super relativity is a metaphysical. The overall strategy concerning the theory of super relativity is very sensible. I must complete Einstein's dream of a unified field theory. To accomplish this very challenging task, I use the evidence found in nature along with the correct interpretations given to us by the greatest physicists of all time. I use the same philosophy as Einstein. I followed his path. The Einstein approach, in which the geometrization philosophy plays the main role in constructing the field equations of the theory. One of the principles of this philosophy is that the laws of nature are just differential identities in an appropriate geometry. The theory of super relativity provides a mechanical explanation for how our physical universe works. We have been searching for the theory of everything for over 400 years. Our physical reality. This is the only one thing that physically exists. That thing is the ether. The ether is a quasielastic solid. It is the fundamental field. All things that we observe are simply different manifestations of this real physical object. All forces, energies, and particles are consubstantial with the ether. That means they are made of it, are part of it. It is the same thing. Particles are ultra small electromagnetic fields in motion within the ether. It is from this framework that I discovered the mechanical model that I call the theory of super relativity. I searched for and found the origin of mass, inertia, and gravity. Once I came to understand how the gravitational field is created, the discovery of anti-gravity field rapidly followed. If we want to understand how anti-gravity works, we first have to understand how gravity works. By going through the process, many other scientific breakthroughs were discovered. And essentially, the ether is the bottom line. We must remember that. It is the fundamental field. So Einstein basically established that the unified field theory is just this simple statement. Electromagnetism and gravity emerge as aspects of a single fundamental field. That single fundamental field is the ether.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That from that field we get what I'm going to introduce right now. Electromagnetism and gravity emerge as aspects of a single fundamental field. The super relativity version deconstructs the Einstein version of the unified field theory into three separate types, aspects that are unified via motion within space. The primary field of force is electrostatic. It's a twist of space. It is the basic structure of the particles. They're formed as basically a vortex, which is not a new idea, really. It was really very popular in James Clerk Maxwell's time, and Heaviside and others worked on the vortex particle, but they never found the cause of motion. And I'm not sure that they were looking for it, but they had an idea that these particles really have to be either a vortex, a clockwise or a counterclockwise rotation. And there was evidence coming from Faraday that kind of established that that indeed was the case, that these particles are clockwise and counterclockwise twists of space. And that is the primary field, or the electrostatic field. The secondary field of force is the magnetic field. The magnetic field comes about as a result of moving charge. Charge gets its motion from its structure, which causes a pressure wave within the particle that causes the motion. And once that is established, the magnetic field comes about as a secondary force. In other words, the twist in space as it's going along through space causes space to rotate around the particle as it's moving. This makes perfect sense. And this was verified, in fact, by Michael Faraday and his experiments having to do with induction. And so the magnetic field only happens when a charge moves. So that's 2/3 of the unified field theory already completed in Maxwell's time. The only thing left was to figure out a way for moving charges to cause a gravitational field. The other secondary field of force is a gravitational field, and it's caused by the accelerated motion of fundamental unbalanced charges. We'll get to that more later.
Yeah.
You have any questions yet or anything?
Yeah, yeah, I'm like, oh, so many, but I know I've seen some of this, so you're going to cover a lot of it already. But so the vortex is interesting. You're talking about moving through space. The particles surround the object that has motion. The vortex, is that vortex, that wouldn't be like a portal or a black hole, not the same thing. Right? Okay.
No, it's quite literally, and I'm going to show you what it looks like. I have a video. Good. Because a lot of what I did like Einstein did. I connected to the other realm by, I guess you would call it almost like a remote viewing technique of the universe, trying to see things that could not really be seen unless you connected to it and observed it by doing mind experiments. And so some of these visualizations I've managed to put to our fine graphics that give a fair representation, because what I'm saying is these fields of force have a geometry, a real geometry and a real shape, and we'll get into that. It's basically, you can imagine like an electron being a cone shape, with you have the little twist at the beginning, and as it twists and gets larger at the end, the big spiral, that's where the greatest amount of force is, but it's 180-degree of inversion, spatial inversion, which then comes back to, this is hard to explain with words, but it returns back to the x-axis point at that point. So we see electrons as little tiny spheres, but in actuality, in some dimensions, it's really a vortex, especially in the dimension of spatial stretching.
So you mean sort of like this, where, oh, sorry, Mark, where it's like
that's a good idea. That's pretty much it. But it's in 3 dimensions. So the whole, remember, the particles are inside of a quasielastic solid, which means, quasi means that if you have something like, if you go out into outer space where there's nothing and you bring a magnet and you hold it out there, there'll still be a magnetic field in outer space. And so it's bending that space. So if you remove the magnetic field, that space will snap back to its original position.
Like that?
Right. And then it'll snap back again. That's quasi. Elastic means it can be deformed, bent little bits in one direction or another. That's what you're showing when you're folding it. That's the elastic part. And it's usually stresses and tensions within this solid ether medium. And so the final part, solid, really means this, that which is continuous. Don't think of it as a solid like iron or glass or steel. This is something that is just a continuous thing. There are no subparts to it. It is all one. And
Wow.
we are in it, and our particles are in it. Our particles are configurations of it.
Wow. I could see how that would be very spiritual because it really gets in the whole God thing. Everything's
Yeah,
a
well,
product.
this really all comes from, and that's why this is an intelligent design theory, because if you go to the very beginning, the foundation of this existence, of this universe, and all universes for that matter, you have to come to the conclusion at some point that everything came into being from nothing at all or something.
Right.
And since it's never really been demonstrated that something can come from nothing, because it's not really there, it's highly unlikely that this universe just snapped into being with all this mass and energy and all these properties and fields. It's much more sensible, much more believable, and much more true to realize that this was all created from an infinite source, an infinite being that has always been here, eternal.
Wow.
And so we're a part of that. We're inside of that being, as
Wow.
as I see it. This is certainly a philosophical thing, but I think when you get to the other side, a lot of people do say that.
Yeah, they do. It's a common thing with a lot of near-death experiencers. Yeah, you feel
I,
they.
I can tell you one who very definitely said, backs up exactly what I just say. Father Rick Wendell. Uh, he said, and this is God speaking to him now. He
Okay.
says, all of this three-dimensional world is within God. There is nothing outside of God. Everything within this physical universe has to correspond to laws, and God set those laws. They are immutable as God is immutable. None of this, what we see and experience, is an accident. It is intentioned by God. And I use that word many times in my book, the power of intention.
Yes.
Make this all come about. Time does not really exist. God is outside of time. We
Mhm.
have a perception of time in the physical world. That perception changes according to our circumstances. That's exactly right. I,
Mark, this is funny. People are thinking, "Oh, this is a scientific thing," but you know what? We're actually bringing together the philosophy behind, or the commonalities behind near-death experiencers, and that experience of the oneness, as well as the spiritual aspects, and also other worlds, UFOs, time travel, propulsion of this anti-gravity. So like you actually are the first guest to bring, except for unless we throw in Bigfoot, but that's something else. Other than that, and fairies, you've actually encompassed everything that you're going to be talking about in this series.
well, shouldn't a theory of everything do that?
I know, right? So this is so much more than it appears.
It should do that, and it's definitely doing that. It has to be, because we're talking about the foundations of reality. So, I'm just going to come out and say it as I see it, as the evidence. I'm taking and accepting evidence coming from people like you, coming from mediums, and coming from near-death experiencers. Uh, I have accepted that the vast majority of these people are correct and true, honest, good people who have had real experiences, and we need to listen to them. And so I promote that every time I go on a show. This is evidence that should not be ignored. And
Yeah.
modern day physicists, they insist on ignoring this.
Why is that? Because this is not part of my world. Why would someone? Because I know you're saying that this started with Einstein. Why? What happened from? And we're going to go into Q&A. But actually, this is not bad doing this too, to go through as it comes up, because there's so much meat to this. This is fine too. We could even two-part.
We can keep going this way.
We can keep going this way. I mean, it's just the way it's evolving, because it's so, at the end, it's like, wow, where do you start? It's so much. Why is it that when Einstein started, what happened? I mean, why did scientists ignore this? Why?
Yeah. Well, it's a key moment in time that I cover in great detail in the book. where Einstein comes up with the special theory of relativity. There's a backstory going on while that's happening. Einstein is aware of an experiment, which I'm going to point to right here. Can you see my pointer? The Michelson and Morley experiment fails to detect the ether wind. Well, if that were really true, and that experiment did fail to detect the ether wind, but because it was poorly designed, they had no idea that the particle they were using, the light particle, the photon, always travels at the same speed. So trying to detect the difference in the interferometer, which is shooting light beams at right angles, and detect the motion of space within that system, would never detect any motion at all of this moving frame of reference, which is the Earth, which is moving through space at great velocity. It failed to detect that motion because the photon always travels at a constant rate of speed. So the experiment could have never worked. But they didn't know that at the time. They thought surely the photon's motion, its velocity, would be affected by the motion of the Earth through, standard physics. That's the way it works. If I'm on a train and I throw a hard ball toward the front of the train, the velocity of the hard ball is the velocity of the train's motion plus what I throw. That's not the same as a photon. If I get in the train and I shine a flashlight forward, it's not the speed of light plus the train velocity, it's just the speed of light. And if I go to the front and I shine backwards, it's still the speed of light. So I could not detect a train motion using light. It won't work. And that's why this experiment never worked. Unfortunately, Einstein knew that this was he was monitoring this, and in there's speeches where he makes reference to this experiment that he was aware of it. And so it affected what he said in his special theory. He discounts the ether because he knows if he includes it, what's going to happen is they're going to ignore his theory because, hey, we just had the experiment that definitely proves there's no ether wind, therefore there's no ether, therefore your theory is going to be wrong.
Okay.
So what's so bad about it is it uses the Lorentz transformations. They were developed using a stationary quasielastic ether model. Those formulas that are in special relativity, all of them were developed by Einstein and Lorentz and Poincaré and several others. They were designed using an ether model. How could they be wrong? Because they're not. They haven't been proven wrong. But yet we're going to throw the ether model out. So he put some wording in, knowing that the results of the experiment were going to be null result. And that changed the course of history. At that point, that plus the introduction of quantum mechanics started getting people away from the idea of a real objective reality. Everything started to go toward probabilities, and there isn't things that are, and if you don't look at things, they don't exist. And the interpretation within physics got more vague and more nonsensical.
Really? That's kind of philosophy too. So if you look at philosophy, it became more vague, more things aren't really real unless,
Well, it basically boils down to the old, which side you'll be on. If a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? This is the same deal. If you're on the side that says that tree falls and makes a sound, whether I'm there to hear it or not, 50% of the people, I being one of them, believe that. Then there's the other ones. If there's no one there to hear it, it doesn't make a sound.
It doesn't exist. Okay, got it. Okay, and that even goes back to like Socrates and Greek philosophers and the same kind of philosophy. So it's the philosophy that drove the science for so long not to be able to look in areas.
Yes, wow. So now the philosophy switches. Yes, you're getting it. You're understanding the primary flaw in modern day physics now is that they really fully embraced that. And the further they went along, the more they embraced it. because they could do probability experiments which verified their equations, which were based in probability. But those equations do not tell you anything about how the experiment and any individual particle behaves or works. It just becomes a matter of probabilities. And if you're not there to observe it, that particle doesn't even exist until you look at it. And it gets worse and worse. Now particles, they come from some sort of imaginary field, like the electron comes from the electron field. It's an excitation of the electron field. What does that mean? There's a hidden field that's just for the electrons, and then there's one for photons, there's one for quarks. It gets out of hand. Instead of believing in the one fundamental field, now they have a bunch of fundamental fields that are undetectable unless you smash particles together in an accelerator. The whole model doesn't make sense.
So the process of the approach of many in the past and some still is flawed. That's why you were able to find, I mean, that's too blunt what I just said, but that's how you were able to come in, right?
One cannot find that for which they do not look. So if they don't believe in classical field theory and space is a physical, real thing, they're not going to look there. Everything they believe is about in this world, in this universe, is a particle to particle interaction, which is what they cause in particle accelerators. They collide them, they bash them, and they see what they get. And they can do this in a very predictable way. That's not the root cause of our world. Our world, according to the theory of super relativity, comes about as a particle to space interaction. The magnetic field comes about as the motion of particles within it. The gravitational field comes about as the motion of particles within it. The electrostatic field moves because it's a structure that has within it a pressure field. And if you look in nature, pressure is the cause of motion, just about everything that exists. The motion in your car, the combustion in your engine is caused by pressure within the piston. Rockets move because pressure of the gases coming out the back. Jets move because of pressure of gases moving out the back. I can give you instance after a bubble moving, rising from the bottom of the ocean is being pushed up by the high pressure underneath it. Every water coming out of a hose is caused by pressure.
Right.
Pressure is the cause of motion. So I looked inside the particle to find a pressure differential, a system within the particle from front to back where there's a pressure gradient occurring. This will give the particle the ability to have its own autonomous motion. And we see that in nature. All the particles are always moving. But you ask a physicist why, and they have no idea. And you know what? They don't want to even talk about it because it's really hard to figure that out. And they don't have an explanation for it.
Yeah, things are always moving. They're always in flux, but you're saying it's because of pressure. Well,
pressure within the particle and the medium. So the particle's literally pushing from the back and toward it's like Newton's law, opposite equal and opposite in direction. The pressure coming from the backside of the particle, because the space is expanded, pushes away from the back forward where there is a less expansion. So it has a velocity. A velocity means a motion in a particular direction. That's a velocity. It's different from just speed, which is just a motion, which doesn't hardly make sense. A velocity is a motion in a particular direction. That's what particles possess, all of them. And if they didn't have this mechanical system, which I discovered, this wouldn't work. And I'm not the only one that thought that. You know who else thought about this? Albert Einstein.
Oh.
And I can prove it. I have rock solid evidence that says what I'm saying is true. In his unified field theory of gravitation and electricity, July 25th, 1925, he writes at the last two sentences in his theory, which was very hard to understand, by the way. He says, nevertheless, I'm still far away from claiming the physical validity of the equations I derived. The reason for that is I did not succeed in deriving equations of motion for particles yet. He was working on it into his last breath, because that is what drives this universe. Without that, nothing happens. As he said, nothing happens unless something moves. He was onto it. He was just born too early. If he knew about the quarks inside of the neutron and proton, he would have came up with the same formulation I did, which I will show you later on in this presentation.
Quick question. Was Einstein, and I know that's our relation, people can watch this later. We're going to do a whole segment on Einstein coming through to you, which blew both our minds, which he comes through quite regularly. Why wouldn't he? He's seeing what you're doing. But was he a man that was godly? Did he believe in God? Did he, because this is a philosophy thing too, that's
Yes.
along with it. So was he?
He and I and you and I kind of believe the same thing.
Yeah.
God is a personal God. God is involved with,
Yes.
the humans and other species and everybody who has a consciousness that's in the physical realm and beyond the physical realm.
Yes.
Einstein didn't believe in a personal God. He
Okay.
did believe that God created the universe. But basically, his idea was he created it and he walked away. He just let it go from there.
Okay. Well, all right. He knows different now, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. Of course he does. You asked me to say, yeah.
I love atheists, and they go, no. I'm like, that's okay. Don't worry. We don't even need to have this argument. You'll find out one day.
I mean, I'm a theist. Yeah. And I use that argument, which you just used on several people. It really pisses them off, by the way.
You'll find out.
Yeah.
Oh,
The truth will come out sooner or later. The difference here is now today, we're going to talk about the truth, and you have the listener, you have the choice of accepting it or walking away from it. But at least you'll have heard it. And, you can make up your own minds what you believe. My job here is to present this information so that it is available and it will have a positive effect on the people that hear it. It will make them think. And hopefully it will help me toward my goal of bringing anti-gravity technology into the world.
Right. All right. So let's keep, I want to make sure we get all this in.
This is evidence on this slide. The single fundamental field, as I'm saying, is the ether. On the left side here, the 4, this is all the evidence that proves there's an ether. And the against, one experiment that failed in 1905. After what happened is Einstein released his paper 3 months before the results of the experiment came out. So he looked like a genius because he says, oh, I don't need an ether. And then he writes a few sentences in there and says, it's just about motion, one thing to another. It's not about motion relative to absolute stationary space. It was a sleight of hand, and he got away with it. And they still believe that philosophy and that interpretation today. So let's look at the 4, because it's important for people to understand what I'm saying here. Like, light is a transverse wave. Well, what's the big deal there? Transverse waves only occur in solids. And what did we say that the ether was? A quasielastic solid. So there's evidence. Physicists know this. They know all particles are transverse waves, and they only occur in solids. They fly through space. It must be that space is a solid. The speed of light is a finite velocity. If space were truly empty, made of nothing, the speed of light would be infinitely fast. We never see that. Distance equals rate times time. If the distance between the sun and the earth, which is, I think, around 98 million miles of space, if it were truly made of nothing, as most scientists and physicists say today, nothing at all, its value for distance would be equal to 0, in which case the speed of light would go infinitely fast, and as soon as the light shined from the sun, it would get to Earth. We never see that. It takes 8.5 minutes. Somehow that light is traversing through something real and physical, and it takes an amount of time to go through it because it's interacting with it as it travels through it. That's rock solid proof that there's something out there. The ether has physical properties of permittivity and permeability. Something that does not exist cannot have measurable properties. And we know this. We have machines that can measure permittivity and permeability in a vacuum, and it exists. If space were truly made of nothing, the measurements would be zero. But we never see that. Again, the evidence points clearly that there's something there. General relativity holds that gravity is a geometry. That in itself says you can't have a geometry of nothing. That geometry has to be describing
Are
some
you going
sort of
to
substance.
what
Yeah,
that looks like? The
a
gravity?
metric of some sort.
Can we get? Are we going to get to see that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
The spatial properties of permittivity and permeability determine maximum velocity of light. This was discovered by James Clerk Maxwell. C equals 1 over the square root of permittivity times permeability. And when you calculate it, it comes out to be the speed of light. How did he get that? He
Yeah.
was using an ether model. Again, more evidence for the ether, not against it, because as it turns out, that equation checks out. Gravity, mass, and inertia are all caused by the contraction of space. This comes from me, from super relativity. You can't bend something that does not exist. Gravity is a contraction of space. That's the bending of a space. Therefore, there's something there bending.
Yeah.
If it wasn't the case, Einstein's theory of general relativity wouldn't work. And he says it himself he talks about the ether himself in 1920 in the Leyden speech. He says at the end of the speech, recapitulating, we may say that according to the general theory of relativity, space is endowed with physical qualities. In this sense, therefore, there exists an ether. According to the general theory of relativity, space without an ether is unthinkable. For in such space, there not only would be propagation of light, but also no possibility, there would be no propagation of light, but also no possibility of existence for standards of space and time, measuring rods and clocks. It's just what I just said. Nor therefore any space-time intervals in the physical sense. Yet we see all of those things. More evidence that the ether does really exist. This experiment was flawed, this Michelson-Morley experiment. And I use what Einstein's saying there as authoritative proof the ether exists. Who else knows space better than Einstein? Nobody. And if he says it's real, I say it's real.
Yeah. Yeah.
The forces of electrostatic charge and magnetism are also deformations of the ether plenum. I've already went over that. Particles are persistent. This only possible if the ether is a solid. And that's true. Particles don't, if ether were a liquid or a gas, the structures wouldn't hold. They would dissolve. And we never see that. These particles are rock solid rough. You know, they're hard. You can't get rid of them. They are persistent. According to the general theory of space without an ether is unthinkable. I just read you that. Albert Einstein. Next slide.
Okay.
These are the 5 men that I base my theory on. Together, their work added together completes the unified field theory. Everything that they noticed, all of them, but Michael Faraday believed in the ether. He was kind of on his own. In his Christmas lectures, he even apologizes about saying he doesn't really go with the ether. He thought magnetism was one special field and an electrostatic field was the other, even though his experiments clearly showed that they were related somehow because they affected one another. But all these other guys, Lorentz, Maxwell, Einstein, Isaac Newton, all believed in the ether. This is the A team. I'm going with this team. I put these guys up against anybody today. Believe me, these guys are the ones that know. The other guys, they don't know what's happening. Super relativity definition of force. This is important to understand. Force really comes about as the action of space being bent. When you bend space one way or the other, you cause stresses and
Like this
tensions.
again?
Yes, and these stresses and tensions can, like an elastic rubber band, if you stretch it, you have a force that's pulling it, wants to pull it back together again. Going through the definition of force, force or action at a distance is caused by deformations within the ether medium. Stresses and tensions within the ether are the real and physical fields of force that we observe. These different types of deformations or bendings of space comprise the various aspects of the fundamental field. This is the thing that's bending, the ether. The possible deformation types of a three-dimensional continuous medium. Negative charge is a clockwise rotation of space. Negative charge has lines of force moving inward toward the core of the charge. A positive charge is counterclockwise rotation of space. Positive charges have lines of force that move outward from the core of the charge. Then there's the stretching of space, that's anti-gravity, and the contraction of space, that's gravity. It's just that simple. There is nothing complicated. You've got rotation this way, rotation that way, in and out. That really, when you think about it, that's all you can do with like silly putty. Well, you can't do anything else. You can twist it, you can stretch it, it does the same. You can compress it, and that's the world, the three-dimensional world, the physical continuum. That's the things you can do to it. That's how you can affect it. And when you bend it in these ways, forces occur that cause motion. And so the force is the thing behind motion, and which is how we define energy.
Right. Wow.
So we go to the next thing. So here's a more detailed description of the forces. Electrostatic force is a torsion field. The magnetic field of force is a torsional reaction to the moving charge. And I talk about this is a vortex structure. This is the thing in the magnetic field that happens when space rotates, causes a stretching. That's key. We need that for anti-gravity, magnetism. Spatial density and pressure decreases. Permittivity and permeability decrease. That's very important, because remember that formula I gave you. If those numbers change, if they go lower, then the speed of light increases if you calculate that formula that I told you. So if you can affect permittivity and permeability, which I say you can by virtue of a magnetic field, you can create a spacecraft that can go any speed desirable, not just 2 times the speed of light or 10 times the speed of light. How about 50,000 times the speed of light? How about getting to a star system like Proxima Centauri in 15 minutes, not 4.2 years one way? That's not practical.
Yeah.
You want to be a star traveler, you need to up your game. We need to up our game. And this is the way I'm pointing to the road that clearly will make us have this ability. I believe this is what your entry-level star travelers use, this technology. This is what the beginners use to get to other worlds. Now, there may be other systems. You're talking about UFOs and aliens that are millions of years more advanced. Maybe they can bend space and do that, that technique or something of that nature. But I'm talking about the newbies. This is what we do. This is what we can do because we have the technology to create the powerful magnets necessary. And all we need is a good power source. With those two things, we can build our own starships. And we can go and we could build our own hovercraft and travel across the face of the earth in record time.
Well, I love it. I've just got to make a footnote on hovercrafts. Every time I watch a movie, like, Minority Report or whatever, wherever there's a hovercraft, I am so upset that we should have the technology now to be able to do that, to travel in this way. And I've done a lot of past life. I didn't expect these things to come up. Where's our hovering crafts? Why are we still on tires? This feels so antiquated, like a caveman. Do you think that this is going on anyway? Because people have cited, we can only guess about this, but people have cited in the desert seeing these, whether they're alien, whether they're ours, but it seems to me we'd have the technology, maybe not roll out for the masses yet, but it seems like we'd have the technology to do some of this.
Yes, I know for a fact. I have knowledge that we do have this technology. I have been contacted by a person who had a close encounter, or actually two people who have a close encounter. These people work for the government. That's all I'll say. They want to remain anonymous.
Sure.
They are terrified to come forward
Oh,
because of what they've seen. And it's been many, many years now, and they still remain silent. But this person gave me the whole story. And him and this other person got very close to a UFO that had landed nearby. So close they could touch it. And they saw markings on the UFO. And the markings said, US Air Force experimental. And then they backed away. It started making all these rotating sounds, spinning sounds, and then it took off.
okay.
So I know for sure we've got them. And
Right.
someday, it's up to them whenever they feel that it's the right thing to do. And I don't know that they
Would
will ever feel that way.
Yeah.
without being
Is it an
forced.
energy thing? Why? I mean, we're only just speculating, but why? I mean, is it going to cost too much to roll something like this out? What about the cost of something like this? Is it like a Tesla thing, free energy? Is it going to be really expensive? Or would it just stop the whole car trade altogether? Or would they have to come up with a whole infrastructure for, you can't just have these things zooming out everywhere and people crashing into one another. Do you think that's the infrastructure of a society?
No, it's all
Politics.
all corruptive reasons.
Okay.
I mean, I can go over them. It's a technology that is strategic. He who has it has the advantage, number one.
Okay.
So the unified field theory, if I'm correct, and I believe I am, will be classified. So they probably know about everything I'm saying today.
Oh, sure.
And so anti-gravity technology is the biggest secret that the US government protects. They don't want people to know about the propulsion system, because if they can do that, then our enemies can do that.
They probably already are.
Hmm?
They probably already are.
Some of them maybe. China may be one of them that also has recovered. Anybody that recovers a spacecraft, they could look it over and they're going to find certain things in that spacecraft. One of them is high-powered magnets, usually coils of superconducting wire. And they're going to find the power source. And the power source is probably going to be the kind that the power companies don't want you to get a hold of. And I can go into that too.
Okay.
I know that they're covering up for people who have made discoveries in the area of free energy and power.
Right.
They don't want that to come forward. They buy up the patents, they hold them, and they never talk about it. The government also buys up certain patents and classified them as secret. So, and they're going to continue to do this as long as I guess they can get away with it.
Well, what about the Elon Musk of the world? They'd probably be interested in it.
He would be, if I could get an audience with him, if he would.
Yeah. Okay, Elon Musk, come on. See Mark Fiorentino.
Well, look at it though. He gets paid a lot of money to make rockets.
Yeah. Well,
this technology doesn't cost that much to build, and the cost of getting something into space would drop dramatically. You could take up 500 pounds object in a UFO, and it would cost pennies to do it, versus
compared to the
20, 30, 40 million to get a satellite up now. So it's big business. The industry for the what do you call it? The aeronautical industry, the defense system, all that, they require us or themselves to keep building jets and rockets and weapons. We have to have some sort of enemy. So as long as they can do that, they can validate their big budgets and keep going. And so maybe at some point they'll declare aliens enemies if they run out of enemies here on Earth.
Oh gosh, this is a disaster. God, we need some help. So
it's all about money.
A lot of it, yeah. So what I mean, there are people, I do believe maybe there's a lot that maybe it's just not about money, but maybe they have this is a sense of an adventure that might want to invest in this type of experiment. But you know that we have moon bases and things like that. This definitely would be helpful, at least for there, right? Wouldn't it be helpful for a special program? I
It
think it
would
would be
be so easy. It is easy to get to the moon now with a UFO. It can be done in under 15 minutes. We can get to Mars in 15, 20 minutes if we want. Uh, there could be great thing. That's the utopian society where people can go to the moon for a dinner uh, at a very low cost, because to build the Starship is like next to nothing compared to building a rocket that has to get them there. It's extremely complex and risky, and requires an immense amount of hardware and effort. Whereas you build a design for a hovercraft that can do that, and once you got that designed, you can mass produce it with the energy system and the magnets and the shielding and everything. And you can zip all over the place and carry as much as you can fit in your ship. And so going to the moon for a nice romantic dinner, looking back at Earth, would be very easily done. Going to Mars and establishing a base there probably already has been done. Probably already done in the moon. Probably these bases are underground. That's why we don't see them. Plus, NASA controls the photographs, so they're never going to release a photograph of something that we could identify that shouldn't be there.
True.
So, it's pretty frustrating when the people who are keeping the secret have control of the media that could be used to, unless somebody else sends up a satellite on their own, like Musk, and takes pictures. But the government would never let them do it. It's, no, you can't send up a satellite taking pictures of the dark side of the moon. There's something there that nobody needs to see.
We're working on things.
And if you do that, we're going to arrest you and we're going to shut your business down. So he's not going to do it.
Well, that wouldn't be so good. Well, you know what would be a big game changer if we had this, and not like an alien invasion where it's awful and it's some big, Independence Day thing, but something where we had the we can call them aliens, and not necessarily the Greys or the reptilians, but maybe the Palladians, the Syrians, whoever that land. There's so many different ones that would land, and that would be the peaceful one. That would be a game changer.
Yeah,
right there. That would be a total game changer. And I'm wondering in our lifetime here, will we see that? And I think there's so much activity that's in the sky. These crafts that you're talking about, this technology, that they have been looking and observing, but I do feel like we're going to see something is going to happen. It's going to change things. There's going to be some interaction. I don't know what would create that, but I do. And I think that would change everything. And that would open this whole chapter on your research.
I would think. Now, I've talked to some abductees to get their perspective on this, why they haven't contacted us. Well, they have to a degree, but it's always on a military base or something of that nature, or they capture a crashed UFO and there's still some alive, and they can't get away, so there's contact. But clearly, definitely, they haven't landed in Central Park. And they've made a willful choice. The aliens have to do that. They're not taking orders from us. So
they landed in, what was it? Is this one of the people told you this?
Yeah, Susie Hansen is her name.
Okay.
And she says they won't contact us because we're not ready yet. It's going to cause more problems than solve problems we're not intellectually, emotionally, spiritually the most important one. We're not spiritually there yet to handle this. And
I am. I think you are too. So just sign me up. And you and
I are working on that, and others that that we know. All these paranormal people on the shows, we're working on raising that level of consciousness. And she's saying sometimes we get really close and then we fall back. There's some big problem that occurs that people become, all involved with a lot of hate and anger and so forth. And then we, fall back and say, no, they're not ready yet. That's the explanation that I've received. And it kind of makes sense to me. I
Yeah.
think they could come and land in Central Park anytime they want. And I will tell you that the media will try not to cover it. If it
Sure.
actually does happen, it'll be hard to suppress because people with their cell phones would be making,
True.
and it would be all over the internet, even though NBC decides not to show these pictures, which they have done.
It's interesting, and I know we need to get back to your PowerPoint, but you're thinking Central Park. They could land, and I'm sure they have, but in a big field. I've always heard, oh, they don't like cities, they don't like so and so. But you see people all the time, whether it be on the internet or there's a show caught on camera. It's really quite good. People send in their stuff, but
When
they're in
they do
cities, they're in
land,
London, they're in and so like this is all over the world. People are sending in their stuff. It's kind of humorous to me. I think it's like, oh well, there you go. Well, there you go. We had them in our.
they have landed, like the one place in Africa where the school children saw them. So there has been a few instances, but they talked to those children and they said, hey, Earth, you've got these problems. You got to work on these things. They told the children,
They don't want to have a relationship with us yet. We need to spiritually mature first.
Yeah.
So that's sort of what it sounds like. Well, you're ahead of your time too. Even though this technology, I feel like should have been out there, we should be using it. But then you got to think of the infrastructure. You can't have it whizzing around, even if the money made sense and all the politics and whatever went away. And you can't have people whizzing, banging into one another. So that there's all of the
I
infrastructure.
worked that out. That's easily handled. Yeah, yeah. The hovercraft connect to a computer system on a cloud system, and in conjunction with satellite location, and so like what they do with airplanes now. They have,
You put in your
you do a flight path. So if you want to go to Tahiti, the thing calculates all the other moving objects and their rates of speed, which is all in the system. It's all being tracked. And it says, okay, you go up to 2,000 feet. You go in a straight line from here to Tahiti at 30,000 miles per hour. You got a clear path the whole way. Nobody else there with calculators, nobody in that area or in that range. Boom, and you go. And so all these things are going into the computer system. So if you're going on a long-term trip, any kind of long distance trip, and you relinquish control to the vehicle, that's going to go into a computer system that tracks, the whole.
I got it. It makes sense.
Like airplanes do now.
I got it. That makes so much sense. So it would track everything. You would just put in the algorithms where everybody's going. It would.
Yeah.
And there you go.
Everything is calculated. Every vehicle that's flying is in this system, and you can't fly without being a part of this system. The craft itself shouldn't even be enabled. Then you got the worry about how about people that want to fly manually. It's got to be limited in speed. You still got to file a flight path, and you got to do that. You can't just have people flying around on there because they're going to crash the plane or the hovercraft.
Well, what you could do is those would have to have special licenses, and maybe those would be, government or whatever. You know what I mean? There'd be special services of some sort that would do that, and then the regular people would be automated. So how would that be different? I don't want to get too off track. This is so fascinating. How would that be different than the hovercraft, where you have the propulsion versus you've seen like in these utopia cities where you have to me it looks like a clear tube, almost like at a water park, where it just shoots through it and it stays in a containable area. Is that even required if you have the points of A to B?
That sounds more like magnetic levitation in the
magnetic
train. Okay. Yeah, that's the difference. Okay. That's not anti-craft. And that path is like a train. There's not going to be something coming the other way. You're clear to go. You have the tube. But out in free space, you've got to have a flight plan. Just like airplanes do now. That's how they work. And you rarely ever have a crash.
So this would be more like that, what I just described, the more basically that would be more like a local city, like a subway kind of
You
thing.
could do that. Yeah, I mean, you could build them in such a manner that they are stay in tubes,
Yeah, just
and
for city things or
no reason not to do. I wouldn't bother with the extra expense, but it could certainly work that way. They could be in, glass tubes or a glass frame or whatever, and they're just like little, taxi cabs that don't have
yeah,
a driver. And they
yeah,
get up, you get in, you go, Uber
yep,
for hovercraft.
that's it. And then that would be like city or within a certain miles, or and then
That's
the rest would
certain,
be
it's
outside of
certainly very possible. Have drones doing their own
it.
thing,
Yes,
lifting, delivering packages, uh,
right.
doing all kinds of great work. Trucks that are fly the same way, very, very fast. Amazon will love this because your package on the other side of the country, it's going to be delivered in an hour or less.
This is the whole reason we should do it. My husband, when he saw the drones, he goes, "Oh God, there's so many packages that seems to come here. I get vitamins, I get everything, I get everything you can, dog food, everything." And he goes, "Oh gosh, they would crash into one another with all the drones if they did it all coming to the door with all the stuff that we get on the front porch." So, but yeah, I mean, there you go, Amazon. That's another way to do it. So yeah, but this is the what you're really talking about is the super relativity, is the anti-gravity to go anywhere light years away.
Well, it also does other things that are vitally important. It cancels inertia. If you're inside of the slip wave, you don't get the effects of inertia, which would kill you if you accelerated to 50,000 miles an hour in under a second. A
Okay.
human cannot survive that. A human cannot survive making a left turn, 90-degree left turn at 5,000 miles an hour. You would lose consciousness, your heart would stop, all kinds of bad things would happen, your bones would be crushed, you do too
Ouch.
fast. You have to be within the slip wave, and the slip wave cancels inertia, so that when you make those maneuvers, it's like you're floating. You're floating inside of this ship, and you don't feel a thing. If you don't see the window, if you're not looking out a window, you wouldn't even know you were moving. And
That's
it has to
fascinating.
be that way, or that kind of space travel would not be possible.
So you're kind of like ready to star travel. I mean, you don't really have to be like an astronaut and go through whatever the weightlessness and all of this, and you're going to puke. You just get it. You don't feel any of that.
No, if you tried to make a rocket ship just using rockets and get it to go to the speed of light, which you can't do because it would take all the energy of the universe to get up to the speed of light. But let's just say you could. The Lorentz transformations, if you work through those will take effect, especially when you get up to 80, 90, 99% the speed of light. You'll be compressed and flattened like a pancake for real. You will have inertia that increases to the point where you'll be flattened to the back of your chair, not able to move, not able to breathe. Time will stop. It won't really, but your clock will.
Okay.
And the clock will stop because it won't be able to tick because all the particles will be affected by that forward motion and unable to oscillate in a circular pattern because anything that's moving forward will be inhibited from moving forward. So all your particles, everything in your body and your ship all begins to flatten out as you approach the speed of light. This is a serious physical problem that has to be overcome. Unfortunately, the slip wave handles all of the Lorentz transformations are canceled out because you're biasing space. You're stretching it apart, less permittivity and less permeability, less interaction with the space that almost becomes nothing. It's stretched so thin. So now you're moving through something that all the particles in the ship and everything that are inside of the slip wave field, this highly intense magnetic field, are protected from the Lorentz transformations. It's vitally important for
That is
space travel.
amazing. So what I was going to say, then that would relate, and I hate that I can't see your whole head as we're talking. Maybe I should put your whole head up here while we're talking just for a second. There you go. So just for a second, then we'll go back. And I know we're going to do a part 2, so maybe we could
We could just continue this in part 2.
Yeah, well, let's continue this because let's do this part 2 because what I want to ask you about is how does this relate to time travel? How does the anti-gravity and going from point A to B and universes, dimensions away, if you have the technology where people just don't explode inside their bones crushed and that they are contained and the particles are contained in such a way that it's intact for star travel, then how does that affect time travel? So you're going to have to find out on part 2. So stay tuned for part 2 for time travel. And I also want you to talk about stargates. And then, wow, this is just so much, Mark. we're who knows? We're going to have so many questions from people, but how fascinating isn't this? So thank you, everyone. Stay tuned for part 2. We're going to talk about time travel, UFOs. We're going to talk about more of this type of thing, as well as quantum physics, how that fits in, and then spirituality. And then you're going to get the backstory, further episodes on the spiritual aspects of this and what the universe has been telling Mark and what the universe has been telling Mark also through me for years now. We've known each other, what, 5-6 years? It's hard to believe.
Yes, I think it's like 5. Yeah.
Yeah, so it really proves that we are one. The universe does know what we're doing, and they care. The universe, God cares. So stay tuned for time travel, and we'll see you next round.